that a plan to replace the Affordable Care Act is a lot easier said than done, and we don't have a plan yet. And in fact, just today, former Republican House Speaker John Boehner called the idea of repeal and replace, quote, happy talk. He said congressional Republicans are, quote, going to fix Obamacare. I shouldn't call it repeal and replace because it's not going to happen. And now, with no other legislative accomplishments to tout and no consensus on a health care fix, Republicans are getting an earful at town halls without anything to argue back with. Some Republicans in Congress have offered some proposals, one coming from Senators Bill Cassidy and Susan Collins, another one coming from Senator Rand Paul and Congressman Mark Sanford, and still other Republicans have other ideas. That's the problem. There are a lot of ideas. It's like having two quarterbacks that you think you can start. It means you have none. Joining me now is Huffington Post senior national correspondent Jonathan Cohn and Forbes opinion editor Avik Roy. You've seen him before. Cohn and Roy doing their little ideological debate on health care. Welcome back to both of you. Avik, let me start with you.
Hey,
did John Boehner pull a, what do we call it, a Kinsley gaffe, accidentally speaking the truth?
Well, he has every reason to say what he said, because we have had no agreement among Republicans as to how they'd replace Obamacare. To put it very simply, Republicans are united on what they're against, but they're divided on what they're for. There are some Republicans who say, we really want to repeal Obamacare and go home. That's it. And there are others, like myself, who say we embrace the coverage goals of the ACA, but believe it can be done through a more market-oriented, consumer-driven process. And then there are people in the middle who basically just want to duck and avoid those noisy town halls and make sure they get reelected, and they're sort of trying to support maybe some half measures in between. That's not a recipe for success. And Trump, the president, is going to really have to exhibit some leadership here. He said that he supports universal coverage. He needs to lay down the law and say, Congress, send me something that covers as many people as the ACA, or I will veto it. Then they can have their marching orders and actually put something together.
You're now finding yourself, you used to have to be arguing in the defensive posture. You're now in the offensive posture here. But where if you're Democrats here and you watch all this, is there any incentive to help the Republicans out of this?
Well, no, I really don't think there is at this point. You look at the Republicans, they've made these wild promises for 7 years, right? The Affordable Care Act, it's awful, it's terrible, we have a better way to do it. Now, finally, here they are, they have power. Lo and behold, they have no idea what they want to do. So I don't think Democrats have any incentive until Republicans come to the table and say, hey, you know what? Maybe we were wrong. Maybe this law does some very good things. And maybe, we're willing to work on fixing because there are problems to the law. We embrace, like Avik does, the coverage goal, and we're willing to sit down and work on it.
First of all, we now have the John Boehner quotes in audio, and so I want to play them so folks can hear it, because it's always fun to hear Boehner saying it in his John Boehner way. So here it is.
The framework is going to stay there. Coverage for kids up to age 26, covering those with pre-existing conditions, all of that's going to be there. And all this happy talk that went on in November and December and January about repeal. Yeah, we'll do replace. I started laughing because if you pass repeal without replace, first, anything that happens is your fault.
So, Avik, I think more and more Republicans are finding that out at these town halls. So where is this headed? If you've got this Freedom Caucus that is just, I know who you're talking about. There's about 50 votes in the House that just say, repeal it, period. There is no replace, repeal it. There isn't another 50 votes of Democrats that are willing to help out the Republicans. How do they do this?
Well, Chuck, I wouldn't even say the Freedom Caucus is the obstacle here. The House Republican leadership is developing legislation that they expect will be out within days or weeks, according to Paul Ryan. He said it would be out after the President's Day weekend. Then that legislation will be scored by the Congressional Budget Office. So within perhaps a month, maybe sooner, we will know what the Congressional Budget Office, how it has scored the coverage and spending and taxing components of the House Republican plan. And if the CBO scores that plan as covering 20 to 30 million fewer people in the ACA, look, part of that might be the way the CBO models things, but not all of it. And that's going to be hard to defend. And that's not going to be the Freedom Caucus that fails to support that. There are going to be a lot of centrist and center-right Republicans who say, hey, I'm not supporting something that covers 20 to 30 million fewer people in the ACA. You'll never get 50 votes in the Senate, let alone 60, for something like that.
Look, I'm convinced that the vehicle is going to eventually be Cassidy Collins. What do you make of the Cassidy Collins vehicle, which is the whole, if you like your Obamacare, you get to keep it strategy. Right. But if you didn't like it, here, we're going to kind of block grant Medicaid for you, but do it in a way so that you can't shortchange folks. Do you think that is a realistic vehicle?
If you game this out, where this could possibly go, it's pretty easy to imagine that scenario, right? Where somehow the way the Republicans get out of the mess they've created for themselves is they basically kick it to the states. They could say, hey, look, we're in favor of states' rights.
We're giving you the state right. Exactly.
Democrats would have a hard time opposing that because they'll be under pressure from states like California that will say, hey, we get to keep this. Yeah. But it's a long path to there because I do think there's a large component of the Republican Party that will object to that because they're not getting, they don't shrink government spending much. They don't get the Obamacare stays in place in a lot of states.
Avik, this weekend, the governors are in town. National governors meeting, Republican governors meeting. Most of the Republican governors that have expanded Medicaid, they don't want to get rid of this. They want to keep it. And one of those former governors who expanded Medicaid, who might make that argument for them, is Mike Pence. Do you buy it?
No, in this sense. What the governors really want to keep is the dollars. They want the dollars to flow to their states. So they're open to an alternative to the Medicaid expansion. For example, refundable tax credits to buy health insurance. If they're given enough dollars, or their citizens, their residents, are given enough dollars to purchase health insurance where the dollars are basically the same as the Medicaid expansion or comparable, they're going to be totally fine with it because then it's out of their hands. They don't have to run the Medicaid expansion. The federal government gives patients the dollars, the patients buy the insurance, done. So it doesn't have to be that way, but the Paul Ryan plan doesn't make that transition easy. And so there are going to have to be some revisions in how Republicans in Congress develop their replace plan to achieve that goal.
Jonathan Cohn, Avik Roy, I have a feeling we'll have you back quite a bit over the next 3 to 6 months or actually, I think 18 months to 2 years, because this isn't going to happen in the next 3 to 6 months anyway. Guys, thanks very much. Good to have you both on.